Did you know that women and other underrepresented students normally learn about engineering through their families? My grandpa and my uncle were both engineers, thankfully, because if they weren't around, I don't know if I would have ever been exposed to engineering or aware of what that was or even been told about that opportunity. Dr. Meagan Pollock goes through some of her journey and how she got into engineering. Even though she was excelling in robotics, nobody even told her that she should consider engineering as a future career. So maybe nobody has told you that engineering is an option. And so I'd like to say, yes, engineering is an option. And maybe you should explore it more. One of the other things that she also talks about is how her dad was an engineer by practice and by trade, but he didn't have the engineering degree. So he never felt like he could call himself an engineer. So I'm here to say, yes, you can be an engineer, and maybe you already are an engineer and you just haven't labeled yourself that yet.
How I got into computer science and engineering is like most girls who get into these programs because their daddy is a computer scientist or an engineer. And that's certainly part of the work that both you and I do to change that. But my dad's a computer scientist, my granddad's a computer scientist. And so I started programming, which was quite unique coming from a very rural community in Texas. My first programming class in high school was in 8th grade. And then the teacher who decided she wanted to teach us how to do it, she actually moved to the high school with us. And so I had programming for several years. And despite that, being president of the robotics clubs and this, that, or the other, I still didn't pick computer science or engineering. I actually initially had chosen to study interior design, had my dorm picked out, everything. I really thought I wanted to be an architect. I still love buildings and I still love architecture, but somehow I didn't think that I could be an architect because I didn't know any architects, much less any women architects. But then the week of that I graduated high school, I was like any good sort of sycophant student, was after school talking to my biology teacher. My chemistry teacher walked in and she was trying to tell, Ms. Reeves, and she says, hey, my cousin who's a professor at Texas Women's University, she just got this grant with Texas Instruments, and the whole thing is to get more women to study computer science and engineering. And so Dr. Estes turns to me and she's like, you would be perfect for this. She's like, you're prepared for this. You're interested in this. This is for you. And then she was like, and it's at Texas Women's University. So I stormed out because I said, I am not going to Women's University. I got halfway down the hall and I was like, wait a minute, did she say full scholarship? So I actually turned back around, came in and I said, okay, how do I contact your cousin? And so I contacted TWU. They didn't even have an application yet. So I made my own application and and I sent it to TWU and I said, I heard you have this program coming. I want to be a part of it. And so I was the first student given the money for this women in engineering program. And the program was to take women who are majoring in computer science and math, pay for their school. You get internships at Texas Instruments, and then you go on to get a master's in electrical engineering from Texas Tech University. And, I did like these things, but what Dr. Estes did in that moment that she doesn't recall, and she's heard me tell the story many times, is that she boosted my self-efficacy just enough that it tipped the scale for me. And it made me think, I can do this. I am interested in this. I do want to do this. Because I was always very interested in engineering. I always wanted to create widgets. I was like the only kid in Southeast Texas that had a Palm Pilot in 9th grade, which, at my age, pre-cell phone, pre-iPhone, but my whole life was on this little Palm Pilot, And so that was how I got into it.
So you did all this robotics, all this computer science in high school. Did you ever have any advisors or anyone there that encouraged you to go to computer science or engineering when you were looking at universities?
No.
Nobody.
No, nobody. And this is, so much of the work that I do and have done over the last 12 years is teacher professional development, counselor professional development. I'm one of the few people, at least originally, who had ever published on training counselors around STEM careers. And that was a lot of the work that I did when I was at Purdue publishing on that. Mm-hmm. And the reason is so, the educators just thought, well, she's not interested. If I didn't just automatically pick that, they just thought I wasn't interested. But what they didn't see, and what, so much of the work that I do is to help educators see all of the barriers that were preventing me from seeing myself in that field.
Mhm.
Not only the social cognitive ones, but also like the physical barriers of like, not necessarily physical, but like bigger barriers around financing and like, because it wasn't like my parents ever said, you can't be an engineer. Now, grandma did actually say that. Grandma actually did say, women don't become engineers. And bless my God, rest her soul, she just passed, but and she finally came around to saying, fine, you can be an engineer, but
Good.
yeah, it was, your parents want you to be successful. They want you to do better than they did. And so they were certainly supportive once I got on that pathway. Yeah.
Did your dad or your grandpa ever bring up the idea of you being an engineer or computer science when they were watching you do all this coding or anything?
Well, so what's interesting about my dad is he's a self-taught computer scientist and engineer.
Wow.
So he actually doesn't have that identity. So even though he is an engineer currently,
Mhm.
he only has a 2-year degree. And so he can't be, nobody calls him an engineer. I call him an engineer, but there are so many roles about who gets to be an engineer. And because he was so self-taught, and because he like started out as a machinist and
Wow.
thought, I can figure out how to program this and so that it can do my job. And he
Mhm.
did. And then he just continued to learn how to program. And now he does, engineering design work for like plastic die extrusion stuff. But I think that was a big part of it because he didn't see himself as that. And so it wasn't like well, you can be this thing, because it was almost like he didn't think himself he could be that thing.
Yeah.